The sky over Albuquerque was still covered in ashes. Even weeks after the plane crash, the silence hanging above the city had not lifted. When people looked up, they didn't just see clouds. They saw fear, still suspended in the air. Burned pieces of metal were still being found in gardens, and when children played outside and glanced upward, their mothers would immediately call them back inside. Walter White stood in his yard, staring at the sky. The wreckage of the two planes colliding echoed endlessly in his mind. He knew this disaster wasn't just an accident. It was a ripple, born from his own choices, spreading outward until it shook the universe. One man's decision had reached miles away and taken hundreds of lives. As Walter gazed upward without blinking, he whispered to himself, "What I did changed the entire universe." That thought stirred a strange calm within him. Because even in the middle of death, destruction, and chaos, he could feel his own power. He was no longer an ordinary chemistry teacher. People might still see the same face, but Walter knew the man inside had transformed. He now believed he had the kind of power that could make the universe tremble. But for Skylar White, things looked very different. To her eyes, Walter was nothing more than a stranger. From the kitchen window, she watched him standing outside, and the only thought running through her mind was, "This man cannot be my husband." There was no trust anymore. Only silence. Only lies. The things that held a marriage together were all gone. That day, Skylar took out her suitcases. As she moved through the house, memories replayed in every room, laughing with Walter in the kitchen, holding him close in the bedroom, Walt Jr. Its baby laughter filling the living room. But those memories were just shadows now. With heavy steps, she closed her suitcase. When Walter walked in and saw her preparing to leave, panic surged through him. He rushed to her side. Skylar, please, don't do this. The sentence fell apart because he had no words left. He couldn't lie anymore. Skylar would never believe it. And he couldn't tell the truth. That would destroy everything. Her eyes were hard and cold. "I can't live with you. You're a stranger." Her words hit him like a crushing blow. For a moment, all his power, all his calculations meant nothing. Without his family, the empire was meaningless. Yet kept him silent. He just stood there, watching her walk away. Meanwhile, Jesse Pinkman was trapped in his own hell. After Jane's death, he had withdrawn into himself and checked into rehab. In group therapy sessions, he sat and listened to other people's stories, but he didn't really hear them. The only voice he could hear was Jane's. At night, when he woke up, it was her whisper that haunted him. "Don't leave me alone." His hands shook, his eyes were hollow. Life had lost all its color. The streets of Albuquerque felt like a graveyard to him. As Walter stared at the sky in his yard, Jesse sat in a dark room, haunted by Jane's ghost. Two men in the same city, in different rooms, but both trapped inside the same loneliness. The falling debris from the sky was the symbol of their lives, broken, scattered, beyond repair. And as Walter kept his eyes fixed on the heavens, another spark ignited within him. "Even if I lose my family, I will never give up this power." In that moment, Walter White, the teacher, died. In his place, someone else stood, Heisenberg. The sky over Albuquerque was still grey, haunted by the memory of the crash. But inside the White household, the silence weighed even heavier. Skylar prepared the divorce papers. Her eyes were firm, yet the pen in her hand trembled. She had known Walter for years, but the man before her was now a stranger. Walter sat on the couch fighting an inner war. Should I tell her? Should I confess the drug business? If I tell her, maybe she'll understand, maybe forgive me. This voice clashed with his pride, for confession meant being seen not as a teacher, but as a criminal. When Skylar entered the kitchen, Walter seized a moment of courage. He stopped her, meeting her eyes. His lips moved. "Skylar, there's something I need to tell you." But the words froze in his throat. In her gaze, he saw not fear or curiosity, but cold distance. Walter fell silent. The silence filled the room like smoke. Skylar took that silence as her answer. In her mind, one sentence echoed, "If he won't tell me, it must be something truly terrible." That night, Walter lay staring at the ceiling. Skylar didn't even sleep beside him. He whispered to himself, "One day she'll understand. One day she'll see I did it for the family." But in truth, this was Walter's greatest lie to himself. Meanwhile, Jesse sat in rehab. Slumped in a chair, he barely heard the stories around him. The only voice he heard was Jane's ghost, whispering, "Don't leave me." His emptiness mirrored Walter's silence. Two men in different rooms, imprisoned by the same loneliness. On the dusty roads near the Mexican border, two figures appeared. The Salamanca twins. Silent, merciless, filled with vengeance. After Tuco's death, family honor demanded blood, and one name echoed on their lips: Walter White. When they stepped into Albuquerque, the air shifted. The thud of their black boots echoed through the streets. Even when they spoke, it was rarely words, only glances. Their silence was the sound of death. Meanwhile, Walter remained blind to the storm. His only thought was regaining his family. He went to Skylar's door, pleading, but she didn't even look him in the eye. "You don't belong here anymore." Walter felt his heart shatter, but pride held back the tears. Only one thought filled the void. If my family won't have me, I'll build a world that respects me. Jesse, out of rehab, wandered Albuquerque's streets. Jane's memory haunted him, in graffiti, in song lyrics, everywhere. One sentence echoed in his mind: "She died because of me." When the twins neared Walter's home, what they left behind was simple: the shadow of death. In the streets of Albuquerque, the footsteps of the DEA echoed. Hank Schrader had been chasing the trail of blue crystal for days. Others said no ordinary cook could make something so pure, but Hank already knew. This was chemistry. During a raid, he slipped a shard into his pocket. His instincts whispered, "There's a mind behind this and I'll find him." Meanwhile, Walter considered quitting. Skylar had grown cold, preparing divorce papers. Alone at night, he thought, maybe I should stop. But another voice within snapped back, "You won't. You were born to rule." Skylar leaned closer to Ted Benicky. Each shared moment at work filled the void Walter left. Ted's laughter dressed her wounds, even as it carved new scars of guilt. As Walter longed to win his family back, he drifted further. DEA's steps crept closer, and in the shadows, Gus Fring's calm eyes watched. One evening, Walter was called to Los Pollos Hermanos. Neon lights flickered, customers quietly ate their chicken. But for Walter, this wasn't dinner, it was destiny. At the table sat Gus Fring, calm, measured smile, eyes of ice. He seemed to read Walter from within. "Work with me," he said softly. "I give you order, safety, money. You give me product." Walter admired him. Gus wasn't crude like the others. He was a businessman. Beside him, Walter felt truly big for the first time. But fear lingered. This was a road with no return. Gus's words echoed, "You don't have much time to think." That night at home, Walter stared into the mirror. The teacher was gone. In his eyes shimmered the spark of empire. Walter was torn between two worlds. On one side, Skylar's fading love, the hope of holding his family together. On the other, Gus's promise of order and empire. Late at night, he stood before the mirror. He barely recognized the man staring back. The chemistry teacher was gone. In his place stood a man hungry for a throne. Skylar drifted further into Ted Benicki's orbit, finding the warmth Walter denied her. Their marriage was breaking beyond repair. Meanwhile, Jesse in rehab spoke aloud for the first time. "I'm the bad guy, but I learned it from a teacher." Walter's shadow was carved into Jesse's soul. To him, Walter was both savior and curse. The Albuquerque noon sun was harsh, but the true weight came from the shadows. Few knew the Salamanca cousins were crossing the city in silence. If they had, the wind itself would have driven people indoors. They were two knives walking for family honor, and the target of the blades was about to be redirected. Invisible strings, Gus Fring's strings, were slowly tugging vengeance onto another path. Hank Schrader kept trying to fit the pieces together. Since the plane crash, he ignored the city's flinches and followed the pure blue trail step by step. A name kept circling back: Jesse Pinkman. An anonymous call that morning drew a dot on Hank's map. "Think about Jesse again." The tone was casual, the implication heavy. Fresh out of rehab, Jesse was relearning the shape of his own shadow. He didn't miss Jane in the furniture, he missed her in the silence. Then knock at the door, Hank on the threshold. A hard question, then another. The air thinned. Something inside Hank, grief, rage, frustration, snapped like a taut wire. The wall caught Jesse's back. Hank's fist caught Jesse's face. Glass broke. A table leg skittered across linoleum. Jesse slumped, blood on his lip, purple rising in his eye. Hank realized the weight of what he'd done only when his hands started to shake back in the car. Jesse reached for his phone, breath ragged. Lawyer. Saul Goodman's loud colors and flexible morals clicked on. "We sue, we get paid," Saul chirped. "DEA agent beats a civilian? Sweetest case in town." But Jesse's hurt was not only flesh. Walter's silhouette flickered in his mind. "Who put me on this road?" He could not say the answer out loud. Hank went home carrying a story he couldn't tell. "What happened?" Marie asked. "Nothing," Hank said, but the storm inside him grew. In a near-empty parking lot, he sat in his car, fingers rubbing the wheel. Then the phone rang. A breath, a whisper. 1 minute. Warning or threat, he couldn't tell. He learned, in that moment, how long a minute could stretch and how cold metal felt on the skin of the world. He hung up and scanned his surroundings. Time shrank to the width of a tire's touch on asphalt. A pickup crawled closer. The sun struck an axe blade. The sound was that dull song of metal on metal. One cousin yanked a door, the other pinned the car. The world fell quiet. Hank's body moved before his mind. Gear, reverse, lurch, shadow in the mirror, spiderweb cracks blooming on glass. That single 1 minute expanded to the length of a life. The first shot rang like a bell on steel. Hank's hand dove for his gun, but time still rubbered and stretched. One cousin heaved against the door, the other dropped the axe for something deadlier. Hank found the trigger. A knife of breath stabbed his chest. Blast, echo, second blast. Smell, oil, dust, blood. One cousin fell, the other staggered. Hank slumped at the twisted angle of the doorframe, hearing only the thunder of his heart in the vast quiet. When people need proof they're alive, they look at the sky. Hank did. When 1 minute ended, time returned to its ordinary trickle. But that minute would leave a lifelong scar. By night, hospital white swallowed the city. Marie's scream carried down tile corridors. Somewhere else in Albuquerque, behind a counter at Los Pollos Hermanos, Gus Fring washed his hands, straightened a menu, and walked as if nothing had happened, as if everything had happened exactly as planned. And in his living room, Walter read the caption, "Agent attacked," on the low TV volume. A dark acceptance stirred inside. Balance had shifted. New order, new terms. The hospital gathered the city's pulse into a single vein. Papers trembled in Marie's hands. Every syllable from the doctors rang louder than the wall clock. Hank was alive, but a new war had begun inside his body. Bullets had left their marks. Nerves and bones hummed with unending ache. Marie watched monitors without blinking. Skylar set a hand on her shoulder. "I'm here." An invisible bridge rose between them, one that Walter was the last person to cross. When Walter stepped into the corridor, he was greeted as both husband and stranger. Marie's eyes cut sharp. "Who did this? What are we up against?" A reply formed in Walter's mind, rose to the tongue. But all he said was, "What matters is Hank's recovery." Skylar sensed more pages behind the sentence. In Walter's eyes, a thin line flickered between pride and concealment. Gus Fring arrived with measured flowers. Warm words for Marie, a respectful nod to Skylar. He met Walter's gaze, 2 sentences, an entire universe between them. "Your family," Gus said, "should be your priority." Then, like a silk thread, "and your work." 2 words, 2 worlds. Walter understood. The man's kindness was forged of steel. Down in the lab, another shift approached. Gail Berticher was a metronome, notebooks squared, glassware gleaming. He admired Walt's chemical prose, marrying poetry to procedure. Yet a problem pulsed. Gail ran the discipline. He lagged behind Walt's improvisations. In Gus's world, creativity had to keep time. When rhythm faltered, the orchestra changed. In the wake of the attack, Jesse sat on his couch, face bruised, soul raw. Saul brought a different offer. "Yes, we sue. Bigger though, business." Jesse flinched. Walter looked at him through the wreckage and placed a plan behind Jesse's eyes. Their shared past tightened again, bond and shackle both. One day, Walt descended to the lab and found Gail's station empty. The door opened, Jesse walked in, sweatshirt hanging, a new notch in his stare. Neither spoke. Light on glass fell across the silence between them. Walt flipped the switch. The vents rose in a metallic sigh. "Let's cook," he said. Jesse nodded, a stubborn line carving his lip. Back at the hospital, Hank's fingers twitched. Tears spilled from Marie. Skylar breathed for the first time that day. In that instant, two equations solved in Walter's mind. To hold the family, you need money. To pass the money, you need a story. He glanced at Skylar, leaving the old world's door. He needed the new world's keys. In his office, Gus closed a folder. Fried chicken scent outside, clean paper inside. With the city fixed on a hospital bed, he retuned the orchestra. A fresh stage rose for Walter. Blue glow, steel racks, a kingdom in glass. Every step around him was being called to a single rhythm. At dusk, Walt left the lab and cut a look at Jesse. The look didn't say, "I chose you," nor did it say, "I'll use you." It was chemistry's math, the intersection of necessary and possible. Gale's departure left a fingerprint on glass. Perfection had lived there, but perfection alone wasn't enough. Walter knew working with Jesse meant friction, but in Jesse's instincts lived a spark, the happy accident that sometimes made chemistry sing. Walter built his kingdom from math. Still, results often hid in the margin of error. Back on the line, Jesse brought his unhealed anger to the bench. The bruise faded from his face, not from his soul. Watching liquid ribbon through glass reminded him now of a bombed sky, now of light tangling in Jane's hair. Walter saw it and didn't name it. He turned the heat, set the pressure, let sulfur speak better than words. At the hospital, a new need found a voice. Money, surgeries, rehab, time. The numbers birthed fresh panic in Marie's eyes. Skylar stared at the statements and fell silent. Then she noticed something she once loved in Walter's face, now hated: solution. "We can pay," Walter said. Ice crawled across Skylar's gaze. "How?" Truth would knock down the house. That meant they needed a story. Gambling. Simple, explainable, untraceable. The words rolled from Walter's mouth, crossed Marie's face to Skylar's. "I've been playing small bets," he said. Luck turned. The softness of the lie dropped in Skylar's chest like a stone. But the machines humming in Hank's room muffled her conscience. She opened a door she never wanted to touch. This time, fine. Thus, the lie bent itself into a cover story to hold a family up. From afar, Gus warmed the center without touching the family's circle. Gale out, Jesse in, Hank down, Skylar compelled to the story. Each move slotted into rhythm. For Gus, order meant more than frying chicken. It meant crisping decisions at the right heat. First full shift in the lab. Jesse overfilled a measure by a shade. Walter lifted a brow but didn't bark. "Leave it," he said. "Let's see." The sentence spread like sky. The reaction rose hotter than expected. Walt eased the valve. Jesse coaxed the crest back into the reservoir. They shared a brief smile, a winter sun that vanished as it arrived. The small win reminded them something in them still matched. Near dusk, Skylar cornered Walt in the hospital corridor. "This gambling story," she asked softly. "Do I tell it too?" Walt lowered his head. "If we want to keep the family." Skylar's shoulders sank. Sometimes not falling means leaning on a wall. She did. When she shaped the lie with her own hands, she felt a piece flake off the woman she had been. That night, Jesse checked his pockets. Cash, plan, pride, and a new anger. He stood before the mirror. "Whose partner am I?" he asked. The answer fogged the glass. "The man's." He didn't speak the name. Speaking it would invite him inside. Jesse already shared his house with a ghost. From his dark office window, Gus watched the kitchen's order. Metal, glass, light. The ping of forks. The soft thud of cash drawers. The city took a breath from a hospital room and let it out in a lab-s low hum. Gus had set the rhythm. Walt and Jesse kept time. The hot Albuquerque wind slipped through windows while invisible fractures widened in Walter White's life. At dinner, Skylar was silent. Even the tap of her fork against the plate rang like a heavy bell in Walter's ears. The family table was no longer a home. It was a courtroom. Skylar still thought of Ted. The warmth she felt at work made the coldness at home sharper. She hadn't said, "You're a stranger to me," but her eyes did. Walter tried to fill the silence with the gambling story. He told it again and again, adding small details each time to make it more believable. But each addition weighed the lie down further. Skylar's eyes narrowed. Walter drowned in his own echo. At the hospital, rehab began for Hank. Every step was pain stitched with patience. Marie's endurance was tested by Hank's frustration. Once the DEA's toughest hunter, Hank Schrader now leaned on a cane. Jesse fought his own battle. Back in the lab, his rage made him clumsy. Overfilled beakers, careless mistakes. Walter chose not to scold. Jesse's presence wasn't just for business, it was for Walter's conscience. Keeping him close meant sharing the weight of guilt. One evening, Walter waited outside his house for Jesse. He thought, where did I go wrong? At the start, it was all for family. Now, stars flickered above, calm against his chaos. Meanwhile, Gus Fring watched from afar. To him, Walter was still a kingdom, but one to control. Replacing Gale with Jesse was deliberate. Jesse was both Walter's bond and his weakness. For Gus, the perfect leash. That night in the lab, Jesse overfilled a flask. Walter didn't stop him. The reaction frothed, threatened to spill, then calmed. They exchanged a glance. Jesse muttered, "Hell this time." Walter nodded, thinking, but one day it won't. Skylar White spent long evenings in thought. Walter's gambling story hadn't convinced her, but when she saw Hank's medical bills, she stayed silent. Not from acceptance, but from helplessness. With every new invoice, she was pulled deeper into Walter's world. Step by step, she became his accomplice. Time with Ted Bernanke reminded her of the normal life she once had. Ted's simple smile was an escape. Walter noticed, and sparks of anger lit inside him. Anger mixed with pride and possessiveness. Skylar's distance pushed Walter further into crime. Because crime made him feel powerful. In the lab, cooking with Jesse, Walter realized he could win Skylar back not with money but with power. Power itself would be the magnet. Gus' order looked even more tempting because it was the only guarantee Walter could show Skylar. At Hank's hospital bedside, Walter and Skylar sat side by side. Marie wept. Hank clenched his jaw. Walter lowered his gaze. Skylar secretly studied her husband's face, searching for a piece of the man she once knew. All she saw was a stranger's shadow. That night, Skylar put the children to bed, then stared into her mirror. She hardly recognized herself. A whisper slipped, "What am I doing?" But the next morning, she rose and lived the same story again. Sometimes the greatest crime is committed in silence. As Walter White's world grew, so did its shadows. In the back room of Los Polos Hermanos, Gus Fring quietly arranged his plans. Gail gone, Jesse present, Walter dependent, everything looked balanced. But balance can collapse with a single spark. When Walter looked at Jesse in the lab, he saw not just a partner, but the echo of his own mistakes. Jesse's rage, his clumsiness, his fragility. All reflections of Walter's choices. If I keep him close, I absolve myself, he thought. But Jesse's presence was also an open door for Gus. Walter sensed that too. Meanwhile, Skylar was pulled deeper. When she had to repeat the gambling story to neighbors, her voice trembled. Later, she told it more smoothly. Repetition made the lie resemble truth. Skylar drew a new line inside her conscience. I am part of this story now. Hank's recovery was painful. Each step in therapy was clenched teeth and sweat. Marie's tears mixed with Hank's struggle. Their suffering made Walter's crimes blur into invisibility. Everyone's eyes were elsewhere. One night, driving home, Walter asked himself, am I still Walter White, or am I Heisenberg? The question had no answer, but the lack of answer proved the transformation was complete. The underground lab was an aquarium that refused the night. Glass gleaming, steel in straight lines, ventilation breathing in a steady hush. Walter White tapped the same spot on his clipboard with a pen. Above, circling the fluorescent halo, something moved. Dust at first, then a rhythm that didn't belong. A fly. In chemistry, you don't dismiss contamination. The smallest impurity can steer the purest reaction off its path. Walter's gaze locked on the speck, and the current of the room changed. Jesse was checking the luster of crystal settling in the cone when Walt said, "Stop!" Jesse blinked. "What?" Walt pointed up. "As long as that's in here, our margin of error is alive." Jesse knew Walt's paranoia. This was different. In Walt's voice lived not just quality control, but the weight of crime and the scent of regret. "A single fly doesn't burn the world," Jesse muttered. Walt, without looking away. "Sometimes it does." He never said Jane's name, but the silence did. They hunted. Walt turned the lab into a battlefield, mop handle like a spear, fly swatter loaded like a rocket launcher. Jesse pleaded to just finish the cook, but Walt stalked the fly as if it were the hinge of everything, because it was not just a bug, it was the physical form of a single mistake, a moment of choice, a death. Jane's pale outline flickered in the shadows moving across Walt's face. Hours weighed down. The hum of the reactor placed a pillow over the room, and Walt's tongue loosened. There was a moment the process was mine, total control. Then a small deviation, small, but critical. Jesse turned his head, but didn't look. And in this lab, they shared an unwritten law. Sometimes naming a thing is dangerous. To put Walt to bed, Jesse brought something stronger than coffee. Walt sagged. Jesse climbed the ladder, reached for the bulb. Heat metal, and distance made a single hazard. His foot slipped. "Jesse!" Walt jerked awake at the crack. Jesse laughed. "Still alive, Teach. The fly too." Sarcasm, yes, but under it a reflex to protect Walt. When the fly was finally pinned in the lamp's belly, victory didn't cross Walt's face. Morning did. One precise tap. A thin snap. "Okay," he said. "Let's proceed." Jesse refilled the measure. "Ever wish you'd done it all different?" he asked. Walt stared at his own reflection in the glass. Chemistry wants different inputs for different results. Life doesn't pay out different for the same bet. When the cook ended, the lab stood like a cathedral. Lights didn't die, they dimmed. Walt checked the chirping instrument once more. "No fly," he whispered. But they both knew it was never about the fly. It was about a choice as small as a fly, how the sky once rained metal because of the tiniest variable. In the elevator, Walt studied Jesse's reflection in the tiles. "You did good today," Jesse shrugged. "It was just a fly." Walt adjusted his glasses. "No, a threshold." Jesse didn't answer, or chose not to. The doors sealed behind them, holding one lingering scent: clean glass, fresh chemistry, and secrets. Morning light tried to sketch a new life for Jesse, but his lines shook. At NA, a face caught his attention: Andrea. Quiet, but in that quiet lived a refusal to give up. Listening to her, Jesse heard a page from his own book. During the break, he approached, words tentative, smile fragile. For the first time, he found understanding rather than judgment in someone's eyes. Then a small figure appeared beside her, Brock. A warm stone dropped into Jesse's hollow. Unexpected tenderness rose. Meanwhile, Walter and Skylar faced each other in the kitchen. The gambling story had convinced neighbors but wasn't sustainable. Skylar wore an accountant's gravity. "We need to talk about how to launder," she said. Laser tag was plastic fantasy. She met Walter S. eyes with a co-conspirator S. poise. "We need a real business." Respect and fear mixed inside Walter. Skylar had crossed from suspicious spouse to someone who could play. A seed for a car wash fell into soil, not yet sprouting. Strolling with Andrea, Jessie brushed against another story. When her little brother came up, Jessie's chest tightened. Thomas wasn't just a name, he was the knot in Jessie's dark rope of memory. Jessie's friend combo had died to a bullet fired by a child's finger. A cheap order, a dirty reward, names stacked, and when Jesse realized this might be that child, his breath hitched. Andrea looked away. The world bowed its head for a second. Back in the lab, Walt and Jesse kept time while the world outside weighed children on a scale of bullets. Walt noticed Jesse drifting. "What is it?" he asked. Jesse shrugged, but the pipette in his hand squeaked under squeeze. In the beaker's sheen, a microfracture showed, Jesse's voice still inside it, fragile. At Hank's bedside, Skylar whispered with Marie while the lie changed shape. It wasn't a sentence anymore, it was bookkeeping. Lot, check, till, receipt. Skylar spread numbers like netting, making the cover story believable enough not to tear. Watching that cool intelligence, Walt recognized a power as dangerous as Heisenberg, Skylar's capacity to impose order. Evening. After dropping Andrea home, Jesse sat in the car. Brock's toy, forgotten on the back seat, swayed in the mirror. In Jesse's mind, Combo's collapse collided with Thomas's blank stare. "A kid," he whispered. "How does a kid touch a gun?" Another knot formed that night, not the knot of revenge, but of repair. The streets, however, don't speak that language. In the restaurant office, Gus sorted invoices while laying a cleaner, larger map in front of Walt. In faint, invisible ink along the edge. Caution. When children enter the stage, the audience never claps the same again. The city's lights seemed whiter at night, as if hospital corridors had spilled their glow onto the streets. Hank learned to count steps with a cane, while Marie walked a rope between hope and anger. That rope tied Walter's world at the edge. Every bill, every therapy, every swallow forced him to build a cleaner-looking cover. Skylar lined receipts on the table like rifles in a rack and spoke without meeting Walt S.I. This much in, this much out. If they ask, say the same sentence. Jesse met Andrea and Brock a few more times. In Brock's gaze, a game defied the world. In Andrea's story, Thomas's shadow stretched. Street dealers used children. Children were made to grow up before they could choose. Jesse's stomach tightened at each thought. One afternoon, Andrea stood on a line between crying and silence. "They won't stop," she said. "They give orders. He obeys." "They who?" Jesse wanted a name, because name means target. Andrea lowered her head, caught between protect and expose. In Los Pollos Hermanos' back room, Gus weighed new moves in the quiet rhythm of Mike and Tyrus. Mike told Walt an old story, one man, one house, violence, a half measure. "Half measures," Mike said, "protect you halfway and kill you twice as fast." Silence remained like a lecture note pocketed by Walt. Two dealers, the ones using kids, rose to Jesse's eye line, and the world slowed. Jesse watched from a distance. The trade, a candy, a bill, a wink, and Thomas. The kid's hand reached as if for a toy, but it had no name, only gun. A hatch opened inside Jesse. "I have to stop them." When he took it to Walt, two needles crossed in Walt's compass. One pointed to protect the business, the other to protect Jesse. "Don't," Walt said. "An unplanned move sinks everyone." Jesse shot back. "Then we plan." Gus asked to speak with Walt alone. In the office, the door shut. The clock ticked. "If my partner's discipline weakens, paths part," Gus said evenly. "I expect discipline from you." Walt understood. He meant Jesse. To Gus, dealers touching children were the way it is, balanced by indifference. Leaving the office, Walt felt his own balance tilt. Jesse was both leverage and liability. That evening in Saul A.S. office, beneath a gaudy Statue of Liberty lamp, plans were sketched on cardboard coffee cups. Saul muttered about low risk, high reward, winking at Jesse. Jesse said, "Where risk runs high, sometimes the only reward is conscience." Saul went quiet, rare. Walt carried the half-measure story home. While Skylar put the kids to bed, he stood by the window. The street lamp split his face in two. No half measures, he thought. But he didn't know for whom the sentence was written. To protect Jesse, to remove dealers, or to save himself. Next day, Jesse drove alone. No music, no smoke, only the sound of decision. In his palm, something small, dangerous as a fantasy of ricin, not yet formulated. At the corner, The dealer's shadow stretched again. No, child. Was that a good sign or the eye of the storm? Jesse parked. He didn't close his eyes, he opened them. Some nights ask not for sleep, but for measurement. And in the lab's hush, Walt heard Mike's words again. No more half measures. A sentence as hard as chemistry's rules and as cold as street law. One decision would call another. Soon, those decisions would write themselves across asphalt like black skid marks. Evening draped Albuquerque in a crimson veil. Jesse drove with clenched silence toward the dealer's corner. He had decided the men using children must be stopped. His hand tightened on the gun. His breath came fast. The radio was off. The engine's hum beat like a heart. As Jesse turned the corner, the dealers stood in shadow, cigarettes glowing, smirks carved. Jesse's finger edged the trigger, but then light flared, dust burst. Another car swung in, iron decision behind the wheel. Walter White. His glasses flashed behind the windshield, face stone. The crashes roared, tore Jesse's ears. The dealers scattered like broken dolls. One's leg bent grotesquely. The other's cigarette fell into blood. Silence. Walt stepped out. His steps were heavy. He drew his gun, leveled it at the writhing men. Bang, bang. 2 shots. Absolute. Walt lowered the gun, turned to Jesse. His eyes held no rage, only ice. Run, he said. One word. In that moment Jesse understood. It wasn't his teacher speaking. It was Heisenberg. The next day the lab's hum returned. Walt moved with precision as if nothing had happened. But Jesse knew the line was crossed and there was no going back. The death of 2 dealers rippled across the streets. DEA stayed quiet, but the cartel listened close. Gus Fring's face remained calm. He still smiled at customers, but in the back room his eyes iced over. He summoned Walter. "In my business," Gus said, "rules are not broken." His tone was measured, but steel lay beneath. Walter stood firm. Jesse held his breath nearby. Gus stepped close. "One more move like that and we're finished." In the corner, Mike watched. His eyes said Walter's fate was already written. Gus's plan was clear: bring Gale back. Gale was obedient, orderly, emotionless. He had Walter's formulas in his notebooks. Gus's need for Heisenberg thinned. Walter sensed it. Gale's return to the lab unsettled Jesse. "He's going to replace us," Jesse whispered. Walt said nothing, but one equation looped in his head. Gus plus Gale plus Walt's end. Meanwhile, Skylar fought her own war. Divorce papers sat untouched. She saw more pieces of Walt's world. For the children's safety, a dilemma grew. Stay away from crime or make crime manageable. Skylar leaned toward the latter. Control the crime, control the family. One night, Walt left the lab and stared at the sky. A thought burned. If they give me Gale, then I'll take Gale out of the equation. In the finale, Albuquerque's air was heavy, hushed. In Los Pollos, Hermanos' office, Gus's eyes pinned Walter. The path was narrowing. "Gale is ready," Gus said. "You'll work with him. What happens after isn't up to me." But Walt understood. If Gale was ready, Walt's end was ready too. Mike drove Walt down a desert road. For the first time, Walt felt cornered. His hands shook near the wheel. Death was close. Still his mind solved equations. "If you kill me," he told Mike, "the product ends. Only I can do it. Gale hasn't learned enough." Mike stayed silent. His phone rang. Gus's voice. "Do it." Walter made his darkest move. He grabbed the phone, called Jesse. His voice wasn't panic. It was ice. "Fine, Gale. Kill him." Jesse's breath froze. There was no other way. Gale sat at his table, notebooks neatly arranged. The kettle hissed. Music played soft. A knock. Gale opened the door, saw Jesse's trembling hand clutching a gun. Time halted. Fear in Jesse's eyes, shock in Gale's. "You don't have to do this," Gale said. Jesse's finger shook with tears. But in that moment, one life had to be taken to save another. Bang! The gunshot rang in the kitchen. The kettle whistled on. Music cut. Jesse couldn't close his eyes. His tears carried Gale's life away. In Mike's car, Walter whispered at the edge of his mouth again and again. "Remove Gale from the equation.